The war had been raging for years, and Zora, a young alien girl from the peaceful planet of Andros, was tired. She had never imagined that her life would be shaped by violence. The once lush, vibrant world she called home had been torn apart, its beauty replaced by the scars of battle. Her people had always been peaceful, living in harmony with nature, but that was before the war. Now, survival was all that mattered. The decision to fight had been made for her, and she had no choice but to follow. Zora stood at the edge of the great battlefield, her body trembling, not from fear, but from uncertainty. Around her, the other soldiers, both her fellow aliens and their enemies, were preparing for the next attack. They were all warriors now, even the peaceful ones had been, forced into battle to defend their way of life. But Zora wasn't like them. She didn't feel like a warrior. She felt like a girl who had been thrown into a world she didn't understand. A world where violence had replaced peace, and where life had no meaning except for the fight. The leaders of her planet had made a grim announcement earlier that day. The only way to win this war was for everyone to undergo a transformation. They had created a process that would turn their bodies into monstrous forms, huge, as powerful creatures capable of overwhelming their enemies. Zora had listened in silence as they explained the details. The transformation was meant to make them stronger, faster, and almost unstoppable. It was their only hope. But as the leader spoke, Zora felt a deep unease. She had never been one for violence, and now she was being told that in order to protect her people, she would have to change into something she could hardly recognize. Something monstrous. The transformation would not be an easy one. It was painful, both physically and mentally. Once completed, the subject would no longer resemble their former self. The process would strip away their humanity and turn them into a creature of pure power. Zora knew she had no choice but to accept the transformation, but the thought of becoming a monster terrified her. What would she lose? Would she ever be able to find her way back to who she was before? Zora stood in front of the transformation chamber, her heart pounding. She had seen others enter the chamber before her, and she had heard their screams as the transformation took place. Some of them never returned, lost to the process, their minds consumed by the monstrous forms they had taken on. The thought of it made her sick to her stomach, but there was no time for hesitation. The war needed them to fight, and Zora was one of the last remaining hopes of her people. With a deep breath, Zora stepped into the chamber. The door slid shut behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her inside. The lights flickered as the machines around her powered up. The cold metal walls hummed as if anticipating the pain to come. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. She couldn't afford to let fear control her now. Her planet or people were depending on her. The transformation began. It started with a sharp pain in her chest, as if her very bones were being pulled apart. Zora gasped, her hands gripping the sides of the chamber as the sensation of stretching and tearing filled her body. Her skin began to burn, her muscles growing and shifting beneath the surface. The once delicate frame she had carried was now expanding, growing larger and stronger. Her heart raced as the pain intensified, and she fought the urge to scream. She had to be strong. Her face, once soft and young, began to change. Her features contorted, her jawline sharpening as her body mutated. Her once beautiful eyes, the color of the deep ocean, began to glow a fierce red, a signal that the transformation was in full swing. Her long flowing hair writhed and turned into tendrils that coiled around her head. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing down, but there was no way out. It was trapped in this process. Zora's arms stretched, the muscles thickening and becoming more defined. Her fingers morphed into claws, and her legs grew powerful and muscular, designed for strength and speed. Every part of her being was changing, becoming something she had never imagined. She could feel the new form taking shape inside her, each new feature more monstrous than the last. Her once delicate body was now a hulking figure, capable of destroying anything in her path. The pain continued, and Zora felt as though she was being torn apart from the inside out. But through it all, one thought remained in her mind. She had to survive. She had to fight for her people. The transformation finally began to slow. Zora's breath came in ragged gasps as her new body settled into place. She was no longer the girl who had walked into the chamber. She was something else now, something much stronger, but also much more dangerous. As she opened her eyes, she looked at her new form in the reflection of the chamber's glass. What stared back at her was not a girl, it was a monster. Her heart sank as she realized the cost of this victory. She had won the power to fight, but she had lost herself in the process. There was no going back. And yet, amid the monstrous form she had become, there was still a small, fragile part of Hertha, part that longed for the peaceful life she once had. But that part of her was buried deep inside, hidden beneath the monstrous exterior. For the first time, Zora understood the true cost of war. It wasn't just the lives lost, it was the loss of oneself. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the chamber, ready to face the war that awaited her. But as she walked forward, she couldn't shake the feeling that her true battle had just begun. Zora stood alone in the midst of the war-torn battlefield. Her monstrous form towered above the scattered debris and fallen soldiers, both alien and human alike. The transformation was complete, and she had become something unrecognizable. A creature that seemed to belong to the nightmares of anyone who dared to witness it. Her huge claws scraped the ground with each step, the earth trembling beneath her. The air was thick with smoke, and the scent of blood and destruction hung heavy. She was a weapon now, a force to be reckoned with. But as she looked around, Zora felt more like a prisoner than a soldier. Her monstrous form had alienated her from everything she once knew. Her people, the peaceful Androssians, no longer recognized her. They saw only a terrifying beast. But worse still was the realization that even the humans whom they had been fighting against feared her. The war was no longer about survival. It was a game of power. Her people, once kind and gentle, had now become mindless killing machines. And she had been forced into this transformation to fight or be left behind. Zora wasn't sure who she was anymore, whether she was still the girl from Andros, or simply a monster created to win a war. As she walked through the desolate landscape, her monstrous form casting a long shadow over the wreckage, something caught her eye. In the distance, there was a human soldier standing still, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Most soldiers would have run at the sight of her, or worse, opened fire. But this one, he didn't move. He just watched her with calm, unwavering eyes. Zora halted in her tracks. She had seen human soldiers before, but none of them had ever looked at her like this, like she was more than just a weapon. Most of the humans had been terrified, even enraged by the sight of her transformation, but this one seemed to see something deeper. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. The explosions, the gunfire, the clamor of the ongoing war, they all blurred into the background. Zora's heart, still pounding from the transformation, skipped a beat. There was something in the human's gaze, something soft, something kind. Her instincts screamed for her to attack, to finish the job she was created for. But instead, she took a cautious step forward. She wasn't sure what compelled her to move closer. She was no longer the girl who had lived among her peaceful people. She was a monster, a soldier created to kill. But for the first time since her transformation, something inside her resisted the urge to strike. The human soldier still didn't move. He simply stood there, unmoving. Zora's large form loomed over him, yet he remained unfazed. She could see the tiny details in his face, his furrowed brow, the slight tension in his jaw, but most of all, the calmness in his eyes. It was as though he wasn't afraid of her. Slowly, the human spoke. His voice was low, steady, but filled with curiosity. "Are you... real?" Zora's mind spun. Real? What did he mean? Of course she was real. She could feel the weight of her monstrous body, the power that surged through her. She could hear her heart beating loudly in her chest, the growl of her stomach, the rush of adrenaline. She was real, more real than she had ever been, but perhaps he wasn't asking about her form. Perhaps he was asking about who she was inside. Was she still the girl from Andros, or had the transformation completely erased her humanity? The human took a step closer, his hand resting gently on the rifle. He wasn't aiming it at her, though. Instead, his grip was relaxed, almost as if he were uncertain whether she would attack or not. He studied her carefully, his gaze flicking over her monstrous features but never lingering in fear. His eyes weren't filled with hatred or revulsion. They were filled with something else, something Zora couldn't quite place. "Are you forced into this?" the human asked, his voice soft but full of genuine concern. Zora froze. Had ever asked her that before? No one had ever seemed to care. Everyone she had encountered so far saw only the monster, the creature capable of tearing apart entire battalions. But this soldier, this human, was different. His question wasn't about what she was. It was about who she was. A strange feeling stirred in Zora's chest. She wasn't sure what it was, hope, maybe, or something more fragile. Her claws clenched and unclenched, but she didn't strike. She didn't know how to explain.
How could?
She'll tell him that she was forced into this monstrous form to fight a war that wasn't even hers. How could she explain that her world was shattered, her humanity lost, and now all that was left was the rage of battle? The human soldier took another step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know what it's like to be forced into something you don't want to do," he said. "But that doesn't mean you have to lose who you are. You're more than this." Zora blinked. The words hit her harder than she expected. Was she more than this? Could she still be the girl from Andros, the girl who had dreamed of peace and harmony, even in the midst of this chaos? The human's eyes softened, and Zora could see a flicker of something in them, a spark of understanding. It was a connection, fleeting but real. She had never felt this way before, like someone actually saw her, not just the monster, not just the weapon, but the person inside. As the wind blew around them, carrying with it the stench of smoke and death, Zora couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this war than just survival. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The winds howled around them, the battlefield a grim reminder of the destruction that had become their world. But amidst the chaos, there was a strange silence between Zora and the human soldier. Her monstrous form towered above him, claws that could rip through steel hanging at her sides. Yet Sam stood unfazed, his eyes still locked onto hers. It was like the storm around them had stopped, and for that moment, only the two of them existed in the world. Zora had seen soldiers cower before her, seen their fear take hold and turn them into trembling shells of themselves. She had been trained to instill terror, to be the embodiment of the enemy's nightmares. But this human was different. His face held no fear, only calm. Zora's heart thudded in her chest. But it wasn't fear, no. It was something else. The way Sam looked at her, the understanding in his eyes, was more unsettling than anything she had ever felt. She wasn't sure if it was the human soldier's presence or the weight of his gaze that made her feel so exposed, so vulnerable. For the first time since the transformation, she didn't feel like a weapon. She felt human again. "Why aren't you afraid?" "Of me?" Zora's voice rumbled from deep within her chest, a growl more than a word. As the growl of her transformation reverberated through her throat, Sam didn't flinch. His gaze softened, and he took another step forward, slowly and deliberately, never taking his eyes off her. He didn't look at her like a monster. He looked at her like she was a person, like someone who had a soul worth saving. Zora couldn't understand it. She had expected him to run, to fight, to be terrified of the unstoppable force she had become. But instead, he spoke again, his voice gentle. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I don't see a monster in you, Zora. I see someone who's lost, someone who's been forced into something you don't want to be." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. No one had ever seen her like this. No one had ever tried to understand. Everyone else had either feared her or treated her as an object of war, something to be controlled, used, and discarded.
Oh.
But Sam wasn't afraid. He wasn't looking at her as if she were a threat. He saw her, the real her beneath the monstrous form. "You don't know what I've become," Zora growled, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "You don't understand what I've lost." Sam nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I may not know exactly what you've gone through, but I can see that you're more than what the war has made you. I see that you're still fighting, to hold on to yourself, to hold on to what's left of who you were." Zora recoiled slightly, her claws digging into the earth beneath her, the ground cracking under her weight. It was almost like Sam was reaching into the deepest part of her, a part that she had buried beneath layers of anger and fear. Could it be possible? Could someone see beyond the creature she had become? "No," she whispered, her voice faltering. "I'm not who I was before. I'm a weapon now, a monster." Sam took a deep breath and stepped even closer, standing directly in front of her now, his feet planted firmly in the dirt. He was just a human so small in comparison to her monstrous form, but he didn't back down. Instead, he raised his hand, slowly and cautiously, as if trying to bridge the chasm that had separated them. Zora tensed, ready to lash out, but something in her hesitated. She wanted to pull away, to push him out of her world of pain and destruction. But Sam's voice, low and steady, broke through the storm in her mind. "You're not a monster, Zora," he said, his hand still extended, a symbol of trust. "Ah, monster doesn't feel pain. Monster doesn't wonder if there's more to life than fighting. A monster doesn't try to hold on to the person they were before. You're fighting with everything you have to stay human even now." The words were soft, but they hit her hard. She wanted to laugh bitterly. What did he know about being forced into this? What did he know about losing everything? About turning into something unrecognizable? The transformation had broken her, in ways she couldn't explain. It wasn't just physical, it was deep inside, in a place she didn't even know how to reach anymore. The girl from Andros, the one who dreamed of peace, was gone. But Sam was right about one thing. She hadn't fully given up. There was still a part of her that clung to hope, that clung to the idea that she could still be more than just a weapon, or than just a creature of destruction. With a trembling breath, Zora slowly extended her hand towards him, her monstrous claws hovering just above his. She was terrified, terrified of what might happen, terrified of what she might lose if she trusted him. But in that moment, she was also something else, desperate. Desperate for a chance to see herself again, desperate to be understood, desperate to find something human within the beast she had become. Sam's eyes softened as he reached up, his hand resting gently against one of her massive claws. His touch was warm and steady, a contrast to the coldness she had felt for so long. Zora's heart fluttered in her chest, and she realized she had been holding her breath. In that moment, something shifted in her. Don't. She didn't feel like a monster. She didn't feel like a weapon. The first time since the transformation, she felt human again. "I'm not afraid of you," Sam said again, his voice unwavering, and for the first time, Zora believed him. The battle raged on in the distance, the air heavy with the sounds of explosions and the cries of soldiers from both sides. Zora stood on the edge of the battlefield, her monstrous form towering over the chaos. Her claws flexed, aching with the desire to join the fight. But Sam, who had once seen her as a monster, now stood by her side, and he had asked her something impossible: to hold back, to think, not just act. The weight of that request was crushing. Zora could hear the sounds of the conflict, the clashes, of metal and the screams of those who fought. She knew her presence on the battlefield was crucial, her transformed body capable of turning the tide of the war. Her enemies, as well as her own people, would fear her strength. But Sam had asked her to be different. He had asked her to think, to hold back, to choose when to fight. Was that even possible? Could she really hold on to the last shred of humanity? Could she still be the girl who once dreamed of peace? Zora's gaze turned to Sam, who stood beside her, his face determined but calm. He wasn't just a soldier. He'd become something more to her, an anchor, a voice of reason in a world where reason had long been forgotten. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her, it had unlocked something within her. Something fragile that she hadn't even known she still possessed. She had always thought that the war would consume her, that the transformation would erase everything she had ever been, but Sam was showing her that it didn't have to be that way. "Zora," Sam said, his voice cutting through her swirling thoughts. "This war, it's not just about winning or losing. It's about what we become. If we let it take us, we'll lose ourselves completely. We have to choose who we are, not just what we do." Zora's massive form shifted uncomfortably. It was right, of course. The war had already changed her. She had seen it in her reflection after the transformation. Her once delicate features, her long, graceful limbs, been replaced by a towering figure that could destroy anything in its path. But the more she thought about Sam's words, the more she realized he wasn't just talking about physical strength. He was talking about something deeper. Something inside of her, the essence of who she was. She looked down at her hands, now monstrous claws, sharp and powerful. They were capable of devastating destruction. She could feel the raw power coursing through her veins, and it scared her. What if she couldn't control it? What if the monster inside her was already too strong to be stopped? "I don't know if I can hold back," Zora confessed, her voice heavy with doubt. "I've been turned into this... this thing. I don't know how to stop it." Sam turned to face her, his eyes filled with empathy. "It's not about stopping. It's about controlling it. You still have the power to choose. I believe in you, Zora." Zora's heart clenched. He believed in her, a human, standing beside a monster, believing in her. The thought was almost too much to bear. How could she'll be worthy of such trust? She had become a tool of war, a weapon meant to destroy, to win the battle by any means necessary. And yet here he was, urging her to be something more than just a weapon. The wind kicked up, scattering ash and dust across the battlefield. In the distance, she could see the lines of soldiers ready to charge. Her side, the Andrasians, were preparing. To make their final push, the humans had fortified their position, but Zora knew they would break under the weight of her strength. She could charge into the fray, tear through the human defenses, and end the war in minutes. She was capable of that. She was a monster, after all. But then she thought of Sam. His words echoed in her mind. It's about what we become. Zora closed her eyes, steadying her breath. The monstrous urge to fight was strong, but so was the urge to resist. Want to be just a tool of destruction? She didn't want to be the monster they had turned her into. There had to be another way. "I'm not going to fight like this," she said, her voice steady for the first time since the transformation. "I'll fight on my terms, with my humanity still intact. I won't let this war take me completely." Sam smiled. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. For the first time, Zora felt something other than fear and anger. She felt hope. Together, they turned toward the battlefield. The war still raged, and there would be no easy end. But in that moment, Zora knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Sam had become her ally, not just in battle, but in the fight to hold on to the parts of herself she thought she had lost forever. With his belief in her, she had found the strength to believe in herself again. The battlefield was still a place of chaos, of blood and violence, but Zora no longer saw it as a place where she had to give in to the monster within. She could choose. She could fight for something more than just survival. She could fight for the chance to reclaim her humanity, and with Sam by her side, she would. The war had stretched on for so long that the line between survival and destruction had begun to blur. Zora stood on the edge of the battlefield, her monstrous form a symbol of the overwhelming power she now wielded. The sky was choked with smoke, and the distant sounds of combat echoed like a symphony of chaos. She could feel the weight of it, every life lost, every choice made, every part of herself she had given up to this war. Sam stood beside her, his figure small in comparison to the destruction around them. The human soldier had become her anchor, the voice of reason she desperately needed. But even Sam, with all his wisdom and calm, couldn't shield her from the truth that had been gnawing at her since the moment she was transformed. She had lost something. Not just her body, not just her innocence. She had lost control. The choice to fight was no longer hers alone. The transformation had forced her into a role she didn't ask for, didn't want. It had taken away her freedom, her ability to choose. What had started as a fight for survival had morphed into something far worse. The battlefield, the endless cycle of violence, it was consuming her. "I can't do this anymore," Zora muttered, her voice heavy with despair. She had said the words before, but this time they felt different. This time, they weren't a fleeting thought, a passing moment of doubt. This time, they were a realization. She was no longer sure who she was fighting for, or why she had become. A weapon, a monster, had she always been one? Sam turned to her, his face etched with concern. "Zora, what are you talking about? We're so close, just a little longer, and we'll win this." But his words didn't have the same power. They once did. She had heard them too many times. The same assurances, the same promises. She couldn't deny it any longer. The war had turned her into something else. And no matter how much Sam believed in her, she wasn't sure if she could find her way back from this. Her hands, now monstrous claws, trembled as she looked down at them. She had used them to kill, to destroy, to protect. But now, they felt like shackles, chains that bound her to a fate she never chose. Every life she had taken, every enemy she had torn apart, it felt like another piece of her was slipping away. "I don't know who I am anymore," Zora confessed, her voice breaking. The tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed since her transformation threatened to surface, but she fought them back. She couldn't show weakness, not now, not when everything was on the line. Sam's hand touched her arm gently, grounding her in the moment. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, allowing the silence to settle between them. But then he spoke, his voice softer than it had ever been before. "You're still you, Zora," he said. "You're more than what this war has made you. I've seen it. I've seen the real you. And I know you're still in there." Zora shook her head, her chest tight with the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the girl from Andresta, one who had dreamed of peace, was still in there, somewhere beneath the monstrous exterior, but she wasn't sure anymore. The wind howled around them, carrying the sounds of the battlefield. The screams of dying soldiers, the clash of weapons, the rage of a world torn apart. Zora's mind was a whirlwind of confusion. How could she fight for peace when every step she took felt like a betrayal of everything she had once stood for? How could she hold on to her humanity when the monster inside her felt so real, so powerful? "I can't go back," she whispered, the weight of her words crashing down on her. "It's too late." For the first time, Sam looked at her without the unshakable belief he had always carried. He saw the doubt in her eyes, the fear that had taken root deep within her. He saw the breaking point she had reached. But instead of backing away, instead of giving up on her, he stepped closer, placing a hand on her massive arm. "Zora, it's not about going back. It's about moving forward. You don't have to be the monster they want you to be. You don't have to be what the war has made you." Zora's eyes burned with unshed tears, the anger and frustration that had been building inside her for so long threatening to explode. She had fought for so long, fought to survive, fought to protect her people, but now she didn't know what she was fighting for anymore. The line between right and wrong had become so blurred she couldn't even see it anymore. "I've already lost so much," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "What's left of me? What's left to fight for?" Sam's grip on her arm tightened. Not in a way that hurt, but in a way that showed he wasn't giving up on her. "There's still you. There's still the part of you that cares. There's still hope. You don't have to let go of that." Zora turned her gaze toward the battlefield again, her heart torn in two. The war was coming to an end, but at what cost? What would be left of her when it was over? Could she still find a way back to the person she once was, or was she doomed to be a monster forever? She didn't have the answers, but Sam's words lingered in her mind. "It's not about going back. It's about moving forward." The battle was not over yet, and neither was her fight. Zora took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her monstrous form, but also the weight of her humanity that still clung to her. She might not be able to undo the past, but she could still choose the future. With Sam by her side, Zora knew that the true battle had only just begun. Not against enemies or armies, but against the monster within. And maybe, just maybe she could still win. The battlefield stretched out before them like an endless sea of chaos. Smoke billowing up into the sky, casting a dark shadow over the land. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and blood. Zora stood at the edge of it all, her monstrous form towering over the destruction, her heart a mixture of rage, fear, and something unfamiliar hope. The transformation had made her stronger, fiercer, more powerful than any of her enemies. But as she surveyed the battlefield, she realized that strength alone was no longer enough. The war had taken everything from her, her peace, her innocence, even her very identity. She had been forged in the fire of battle, shaped by violence and loss. She had become a weapon, a force of nature, a monster. But now, with the final clash looming, Zora couldn't help but wonder, was there any part of her left that could still choose something other than destruction? Beside her, Sam stood, his presence a calm contrast to the storm raging around them. He hadn't left her side since the transformation, and despite the odds, he believed in her. He believed she could still be more than just the monster she had become. He had fought with her, not against her, and his belief in her was the only thing that had kept her from completely losing herself. The final push was about to begin. Both sides were preparing for the ultimate confrontation. Zora's people, those who had once been peaceful, had now fully embraced their monstrous forms. They were ready to do whatever it took to win, even if it meant losing everything. And then there were the humans, with their own forces, their own determination to hold their ground. It was a battle that would decide everything. Zora, Sam, said, his voice steady, but his eyes filled with an understanding that went deeper than words. You don't have to do this. Not like this. Ow. Zora turned her gaze toward him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. Sam had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. But this was different. The war wasn't just a battle of armies anymore. It was a battle for her soul. I have to, Zora replied, her voice thick with emotion. I can't stop now. They're counting on me. Sam's eyes softened. You're more than this, Zora. Don't let this war decide who you are. You can still choose how it ends. Zora's claws clenched, the raw power of her transformation surging through her. The instinct to fight, to crush everything in her path was overwhelming. But deep down, she knew Sam was right. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper, something she had almost forgotten. It was about choosing who she wanted to be, even in the face of everything she had lost. Sound of marching soldiers interrupted her thoughts, and Zora turned toward the front lines. Her people were gathering, ready to charge, their monstrous forms an army of destruction. They were strong, unstoppable, but they were also lost. The war had consumed them, turned them into things they were never meant to be. Zora's heart ached. She had once been like them, filled with hope, filled with the desire for peace. But now, she felt like an outsider in her own army. She had been transformed into something unrecognizable, and so had they. It was a bitter irony. The very thing that had been meant to protect her people had turned them into monsters. Zora. Sam's voice broke through her thoughts again, this time more urgent. You don't have to fight them. You don't have to be their enemy. Da-da-da-da. Words hit her like a shockwave. For so long she had thought the war was the only answer, that if she fought hard enough, if she destroyed enough, it would end. But Sam was showing her a different way, a way that didn't involve destruction, a way that didn't require her to lose herself completely. Zora took a deep breath and made a decision. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't certain, but it was a choice. She would fight, but not for vengeance, not for victory at any cost. She would fight to protect what was left of her humanity. She would fight to protect the people she loved, the people who had once been her own. She turned to face Sam, her expression resolute. I'll do it, but not as a monster, not as a weapon. I'll fight to end this, to stop the destruction, and I'll do it my way. Sam smiled, relief washing over his face. I knew you could do it. With that, Zora turned toward the battlefield, her monstrous form shifting and adapting as she moved. She wasn't going to lead her people into battle as a mindless destroyer. She wasn't going to become the very thing she had been fighting against. She was going to lead them back to what they had lost: humanity. The first charge began, and the ground shook with the force of it. Zora joined the front lines, but instead of attacking with blind rage, she fought with purpose. She struck where it mattered, disabling the enemy without killing. She used her immense strength to protect, not destroy. The battlefield was filled with chaos, but Zora's heart was steady. Sam fought beside her, his presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they moved through the lines, not as enemies, but as allies. Determined to stop the war without losing themselves, the battle raged on, but Zora knew that the real war was not against the soldiers or the armies. It was against the part of her that wanted to give in to the rage. And with every strike she made, with every choice she took to protect, Zora felt herself becoming something more, something human again. The final battle was not won by brute force or destruction. It was won by the choice to fight for something greater than victory, something worth saving. And as the war drew to a close, Zora realized that, in the end, the true victory was not in the battlefield, but in the strength to hold on to what was left of who she was. The dust from the battlefield had begun to settle, the echoes of war fading into the distance like the last whispers of a storm. Zora stood at the edge of the wreckage, her monstrous form a contrast to the serene silence that now enveloped the land. Her claws, once symbols of destruction, now hung at her sides, their power contained, not eliminated, but tempered by the choice she had made. The war was over. But the question remained. What was left of her? The soldiers, her people. Those who had been transformed into monstrous beings like her were scattered across the field, their once violent urges subsiding. The battle was won, but the cost had been immense. The planet of Andros had been torn apart, not just by war, but by the transformation that had consumed its people. The peaceful civilization they had once known was lost, perhaps forever. And in the midst of it all, Zora stood, wondering if she could ever return to the life she had once imagined. Her gaze drifted across the battlefield, where the wounded were being tended to, and the survivors began to regroup. She saw her fellow Androsians, their monstrous forms, still haunting reminders of what they had been forced to become. Some stood with their heads lowered, lost in the aftermath of the destruction they had caused, while others began to rebuild, attempting to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. Zora's heart ached as she realized the magnitude of what had been lost, but it was also here, in the quiet moments after the storm, that she understood something crucial. The end of the war was not the end of the journey. She wasn't a monster anymore, not just a weapon or a force of destruction. She had made the choice to fight for her humanity, to fight for peace, even when everything around her screamed for vengeance. And in doing so, she had found a piece of herself that she had thought was gone forever. It wasn't just about surviving the war. It was about choosing who she was in the face of it, choosing what was worth fighting for. As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, Sam walked up to her. His steps were slow, but steady, his eyes filled with something Zora hadn't seen in a long time: hope. His belief in her had never wavered, and now, standing beside her in the aftermath of it all, she could see that he had always known something she hadn't, that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for redemption, for healing, for change. "I never thought I'd see the day when the war ended," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying a sense of finality and peace. "But here we are." Zora turned to him, her gaze softening. "We're not done yet, Sam," she said. "The war may be over, but the real battle has just begun." Sam nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "No, but we've won something more than just this battle, haven't we?" Zora smiled faintly, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't just the war that mattered, it was the people they had become, the choices they had made. It was the realization that, even in the face of monstrous transformations, they still had the power to choose who they would be. And in that, there was hope. Looking back at the field, Zora saw the survivors beginning to rebuild, their faces weary but determined. The damage to their world was irreparable, but something within them had survived. And with that survival, they had found something priceless: the ability to rebuild, to start anew, even after everything had fallen apart. Zora took a deep breath and felt the weight of her transformation settle around her. But this time, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a choice to live, to move forward, to not be defined by what she had become, but by what she was willing to become. And that was enough. That was enough to move on. "We may have lost our old world," Zora said, her voice quiet but steady, "but we have a chance to build something new. And this time, we'll do it right." Sam stood beside her, his eyes focused on the horizon where the first light of dawn began to break through the darkness. "Together," he said simply. Nora nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead would be long and difficult. But with Sam by her side, and the survivors of Andros finding their way back to each other, there was something more than just survival. There was the possibility of healing. There was the hope of a future where they could be more than what the war had made them. A future where they could finally be the people they had once dreamed of becoming. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the shattered land before her, Zora realized that she had come full circle. She had started this journey as a girl, forced into a monster's form by the horrors of war. But now, standing in the quiet aftermath, she understood that the monster wasn't the transformation, or the power, or the war. The true monster was the fear, the anger, the hopelessness that had threatened to consume her, and she had overcome it. Zora wasn't just a soldier anymore. She wasn't just a monster. She was something more, something worth fighting for. And as the sun rose higher, casting its warm light across the planet of Andros, Zora took the first step toward a new beginning, a new hope. And this time, she would lead them into the future, not as a monster, but as a person. A person who had chosen to fight for what was right, for the world she still believed in. The journey was far from over, but with Sam by her side, and a world full of survivors looking to rebuild, Zora knew one thing for certain. The future was theirs to shape. And together, they would create a world where peace was more than just a dream.